So hello, this is our first lecture online for special education law, and I'm going to trying a few different things this semester with this course. So bear with me as I continue to try to get better at helping you through this material and providing information and feedback. So what I've done is I've built a Prezi free online presentation program. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to check it out. And what I'll do is I'll add each lecture to this one Prezi, so you will hopefully at the end of the term all the online lectures will be the presentation information will be located in one link, and then I will produce a video like this for each online session as I add to the Prezi. That's the plan. And we'll see if I can keep up. Obviously, it's the first time I'm teaching the class, so I'm building a lot of this as I go, and that becomes interesting. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our session here. So, session 2, we're looking at the Yale text, chapters 1 and 2, and this is, as you read through those, these are the kind of an introduction to the legal system in the United States and how to do some legal research. So chapter 1 is the background of the legal system, and what I want to focus in on in this are the sources of law, the courts, and then how special education law kind of fits into that picture. So sources of law, there's constitutional law, there's statutes or legislative created law, right? And out of that, oftentimes come regulations or regulatory law. And then case law, which comes out of the judiciary. So constitutional law we think of as the broad framework in which we operate within this. Within the Constitution, the legislature is allowed to create law. And the book chapter goes a little bit into detail about how that works, specifically at the federal level. Once a legislative law is passed, a statute is passed and becomes law, oftentimes in the executive branch, there is an agency that is charged with regulating the implementation of that law, and that's where regulatory law comes from. And then the judiciary, the courts, create and engage in case law. So as the courts engage with interpretations, or as cases are brought up about the implementation of a law, whether that's regulation or the statute itself, the courts help to shape case law. Each of these exists both at the federal and at the state level. So we have U.S. federal Constitution and we have Ohio Constitution. We have federal statutes and Ohio statutes and regulations and case law in each of those. So it's important for us to think about those things. And the special education law really comes out of statute and regulation, regulatory law, and then are shaped by case law. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So the courts, I think, are an important thing for us to look at and think of, because oftentimes the way in which laws are implemented and enacted are shaped greatly by the courts. And admittedly, I'm a little bit of a U.S. Supreme Court junkie. I follow them pretty closely on a lot of issues, and especially on educational issues. So there is a horizontal power between these two between the judicial branch and the legislative branch. And ultimately, the judicial branch can tell the legislative branch that they are wrong. Their law is unconstitutional, that it violates the premises of the overarching framework of the government, and they have to change. And then the legislative can actually kind of be in banter back and forth where they change or write a new law or do something else. Right? One of the big ones that we hear about right now is, for example, campaign finance. There was a Supreme Court ruling called Citizens United, which in essence allowed, said to the U.S. legislature that their campaign finance law that limited the amount of contributions that a corporation could make were not legal, and essentially allowed corporations to act like people in elections. Well, there's a whole host of ramifications of that, the rise of the super PAC and those kinds of things. And we see a slight move within legislation to respond to Citizens United to basically say, okay, we're going to try to get around this ruling in a different way, in a way that we feel is legal. And then there's a vertical system of power within the court. So in the text, you would have seen that there's the trial court, and then the appeals court, and then the court of last resort, which we refer to really in this country as the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, and then each state has its own Supreme Court. It's court of last resort. And the number of layers may vary. There may be multiple appeal court layers in some states, but in general, it's a lower court, appeals court, and then a Supreme Court is the way we would think about those things. And so the federal courts for Northwest Ohio, we are in the Northern District Court of Ohio, and actually for us in the Northwest, there is a district court located in Toledo that serves the Western Division. And then there are 3 other divisional courts in the Northern District. Cleveland, Akron, and Youngstown each have their own U.S. district courts as well. And if we had a case that went to the district court, the federal district court in Toledo, and it was appealed, it would be appealed to the 6th district, and that's located in Cincinnati, is where we would engage with that. And then if that case was appealed, it would be appealed to Washington, D.C. in the United States Supreme Court. So special education law has evolved through a series of cases and statutes and regulations at the federal and the state level. So the federal passed the law, and then we ended up with a set of state regulations. And we really will focus a lot on the state regulations in this course, because those are the things that you're going to be dealing with in day-to-day work inside schools. So Chapter 2, I'm going to really gallop through Chapter 2 because most of this information is that's in the text. I'm not reproducing in this presentation, and I'm not going to be asking you to do a lot of legal research, but it's good information for us to look at. And I really think the big thing for us to think about and look at in this is the notion of when we do legal research that there's primary source documents and there's secondary source documents, and when we do any research there's that. But legal research certainly lends itself to this discussion, especially because we have such great access to primary source documents. And so when we look at primary source documents, these are the federal and state codes, the laws, and the regulations. And you can find through the Ohio, through oh.gov, under the government tab, you can find the Ohio Constitution, and you can read it. And that is primary source. You can find the statutes, the laws. And you can look specifically at the laws for the state of Ohio that deal with education, if that's, since that's what we are, the business that we are in. And so those are primary source. And you do the same thing on the federal side. The U.S. Code is there, and you can read it. You can find the actual language of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal special education law. You can read the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which Section 504 deals specifically with education, and you can read that. And then you can read the regulations. And Ohio has just adopted new special education regulations, and that's the documents that I have in our Canvas shell. But that's also located on the ohio.gov website. You can read those regulations, and I'm hoping that come July 1 they will have actually updated those. And you can also look for federal and state court cases and actually read the cases. This isn't the transcript of the cases, but would be the background and the opinions and the rulings of the cases, and that's an important thing for us to understand. And one of the things that I think they made a point of in the book, and I want to mention just briefly, is the fact that the court system in the United States uses the notion of precedence, which means that once it's been decided once once an issue has been decided once, we use that decision to help shape future decisions. And certainly we have throughout our history times in which that has changed, in which precedent has changed, but it takes a long time for the courts to come around to change precedent. So for example, again, famous cases, 1896 is Plessy versus Ferguson, which in essence brought forward the doctrine of separate but equal in terms of race in this country. It was fine to segregate along lines of race as long as the two particular instances, separated pieces can be considered equal. And then we have 1954 Brown versus Board, which looking specifically at education, public education in this country, said, no, the separate but equal doctrine doesn't apply here and isn't right. So we have those changes. So it's important that we look at more recent cases, because those cases will then shape the way the courts are acting in coming years. And the state has the same kind of notion, and we can look up state cases. BGSU Libraries does carry LexisNexis Academic, which is a great source, electronic database to search for cases if you are in need of those. And then secondary sources, there's things like legal dictionaries or encyclopedias. There's obviously books that are dealing with, this text that we're using in this class is a secondary source around specifically special education law. There's other books on special education law that would be secondary sources, and then the academic journals and law reviews are used as secondary sources. So I really love the fact, one of the things that really excites me about the study and the research around law is the access to primary source. So often we don't necessarily have access to primary source materials when we're looking at other areas. And so it's really exciting to me to be able to go and read the law itself and to try to understand it from a legal standpoint, and to also read court cases and look at those specifically. So that is chapters 1 and 2, and we'll do a series of these. Like I said, we'll do a series of these throughout the semester. I'll build off of this Prezi for next week's presentations, and we'll then record a separate video to place in those. So, all right. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on VoiceThread to discuss these items. Thanks.